Well, thank you, Jackie, and it's really great to be at this meeting. This is my first time to be in an IEDC meeting, and I've had a great time just networking here and meeting many of you, and I hope to keep the conversation going. I have a very difficult job because I'm going to give the overview today, and what I am going to tell you usually takes about an hour to describe. And so I'm going to do a very condensed version, and I find that the shorter I do it, the more people don't like what I say. So I'm going to try to give it as gracefully as possible. But as Jackie mentioned, I work around the United States, and these are the regions I've had a chance to work in the last 10 or 12 years, doing a study of the local food economy. My argument has been that a lot of people I meet try to do the food thing without looking at the basic economics behind agriculture or behind the food system itself. So I'm trying to give people those economic tools to have more sophisticated information, hopefully. This has been an incredible education for me to visit all these sites and to do speaking and help consulting with local food initiatives. So a lot of what I say will be harvests from those meetings with people in the grassroots. I'd like to begin, though, by kind of showing you a little picture of the economics of agriculture nationally. This is actually a balance sheet for all the farms in the United States since 1929. And as you notice in that orange line, which represents the sales that farmers have realized, they have actually had a banner year in 2011. But you also, basically the three lines are, the orange line is the cash receipts from farm marketings, the maroon line is production expenses, and the red line is the subtracts expenses from the cash income. What I call the farm production balance and what some people would call the net cash income for farming. As you see, there's been phenomenal growth in the markets for agriculture in the last 80 years, but every time farmers make a little bit more money, the prices are jacked up. And so overall, in the 80-year period, you don't see much growth in the fortunes of farmers. This is a period in which farmers have probably quadrupled productivity, and yet you don't see that financial return coming back to the farm or to rural areas. And I think that's a really sort of interesting thing in itself. But if you also adjust this for inflation to have a constant dollar across the table, you get very different patterns. And what you notice here is that since 1979, farm prices have declined in real terms, and farm production expenses have sort of been squeezed out as farmers have been forced to reduce their production costs until the last few years. But if you look at the very right-hand lower corner of this slide, the red line, you see the net cash income from farming. In 2011, the best year in memory for farmers, as you saw in the last slide, was lower than it was in 1929 after 9 years of a rural depression in the United States. And actually, this is a remarkable thing because we have people saying it's the best years of our lives, we have to keep going, we have to feed the world, at a time when actually agriculture itself is very fragile financially for many reasons. Only two periods of prosperity. One was right after World War II, when Europe was devastated by the war, and we loaned money to Europe to buy food from our farms. And that dwindled away over time, and then in 1973, we asked the Soviet Union to buy grain from us so we could replace dollars we were shipping to the Middle East for oil when the OPEC oil embargo took hold. Those have been the two pinnacles of income for farmers, and leading to a situation today where farm income is really quite low, and again, you don't see much sign of growth in real terms for the fortunes of farmers. Meanwhile, this is a chart showing how much food farmers have reserved for their own family use since 1950, and you see that's gone from about a $20 billion industry nationally to almost nothing in the last 50 years. And I would argue that it's very hard to keep maintaining this idea that we can feed the world if our own farm families are not even feeding themselves. I think it's a very big disconnect. These patterns are really about the commodity economy, about grain, corn, soybeans, kind of things that are shipped around the world. We are very good at exporting products at very low prices, but also that process, which I can't prove to you today because I don't have time, takes wealth out of rural communities and really undermines the very underpinnings of not only rural economies, but also urban economies that depend on them as well. So it's a very, I think, interesting and fragile moment. What's happened in response to those fragile economics is that people are organizing local food initiatives all over the United States. This is Growing Power's Soup House in Chicago, where they're taking urban land to produce food for the city. We'll hear more about Cleveland soon. And you saw the map of all the local food initiatives that hired me. It's a really good map showing the breadth and the depth of this local food initiative around the United States. I want to just take a few minutes to kind of talk about how I think about this food movement and let the other two speakers drill down to specific examples. I actually like to start by asking, what should a food system accomplish? And I would argue that a food system should accomplish four things. It should build in our communities health, wealth, connection, and capacity. I don't think it's any surprise for anyone in this room to say that food is very important to our health. If we don't eat well, it's very hard to stay out of the medical system. Also, as we probably all understand, if agriculture is not building wealth for farmers, it will not be a sustainable venture. So those seem fairly clear. Our policy discussions almost always overlook the fact, though, that we need to connect around food. And that's an equally important vision in my mind. If I have my family over for the holidays, I will serve the foods that came from my great-grandmother's family in Europe. And I will say, these are where my people came from. These are the foods they could thrive on, where they grew up. This is my sense of place, my sense of culture. If we don't have that, we actually lose our coherence as a food system. And finally, we need to build the capacity to handle food safely. We have a lot of belief now we can regulate and have very, very sterile environments for our food, when in fact I think the crisis is much more about our personal capacities to handle food well. We have inner city people now who do not have pots or pans in their kitchen because they don't think that has anything to do with eating. They basically are used to getting food that's microwaved or they're going out. As a society, we were much smarter about food 100 years ago because everybody knew a farmer, everybody had some ability to kind of make decisions for themselves about the basic handling of food. If we don't bring that back to our food system, we are very vulnerable to food safety, foodborne illness outbreaks, and so on. So what I can usually try to convince people in a speech of about 45 minutes is that we're failing on all four of these counts in our food system today. And if you believe this is what we need to accomplish from our food system, we have some very serious work to do to convert that into a really different way of approaching food. The main thing, as I said before, that we like to overlook is the food system is very efficient taking wealth out of our communities. And since we don't recognize that reality, we don't realize some of the troubles we have moving forward to build a good food system, because we're moving forward in ways where people are kind of taking money out of our back pockets at the same time. I'm actually making the argument for several years now that what we call local foods is the best single path I can think of for economic recovery. And I think it's really central to the economic development role. And I say that for many reasons. We spend $1.2 trillion a year buying food in this country. That's now triple the value of the Apple Corporation. It's more money than we needed to bail out the banking system a few years back. It's a lot of money. Moreover, each of us spends some of that money 3 times a day if we're able to. Nothing but food involves everyone in society making hourly decisions about where they're going to purchase from, what kind of future they build with their consumer dollars. I think it's a very critical forum and crucible in which to understand how to build an economy that's more about building connection and building local capacity and less about extracting wealth from our communities. I think if we can't learn it in food, it's very hard to build windmills or to build cars or a better financial system through economic development pursuits without that infrastructure being in place in food first. Finally, when I talk about local food, it's a shorthand for me. I really like local food, but what I really want to see are networks of community-based businesses. You might call those food business clusters. You might call those business networks. Another term I'm increasingly using for this is food webs, where you really think about people networking, not just businesses, but also nonprofit capacity and community groups into a real coherent network that makes good decisions together and can be resilient over time as conditions change. A technical term for that, I think, is community-based food systems, and to me, that's the transformative element of the local food issue nationally. I just want to give you a kind of quick sample of where I've seen this play out in one region, Southeast Ohio, partly because it reminds me of the pace of this work. This is actually a slide that covers 40 years of history. Back in the mid-'70s, some people in Athens, Ohio, who were young and energetic said, we want to farm, but we want to sell food to local people. And some other people started restaurants and said, we want to start a restaurant, but we want to buy from local farms. 2 of those restaurants are still there today, Crumb's Bakery and Casa Nueva in downtown Athens. The Athens Farmers Market was where they met. It became not only a meeting place, but an economic development engine because it allowed deals to be brokered in a very direct way in a physical, very public space. A food cooperative was tried to form in Athens, but it didn't survive. After about 15 years of businesses starting and failing, some leaders in the community, business leaders and also cooperative leaders, sat down and said, how do we create a system that makes it more likely that food businesses will succeed rather than more likely they'll fail? They decided to make a systemic intervention to create a different kind of infrastructure that would support the vision they had. Their answer was ACENET, Appalachian Community Enterprise Network, which is based in Athens, Ohio, and their model was to start a community kitchen that would be for low-income people. And they basically said, with the precious public dollars we have, we want to empower low-income people not simply to get food handouts, but actually to build their own livelihoods by producing new food products for themselves. After 20 years of doing that now, the Kroger store in Athens features a 25-foot shelf with Ohio-made products, many of which came through this commercial kitchen. So the systemic intervention in Athens, which may not be the same for your community, was a commercial kitchen that low-income people had special access to. That involved both public and private financing. Into that mix came a family that decided to raise grass-fed cattle and cows, the Dix Hall Farm. And they had a very new operation, but they said, we think we could make more money if we could actually process the milk closer to our farm. Luckily, they had a friend named Warren Taylor, who used to work for Safeway as a dairy plant designer, designing the biggest dairy plants all over the world. He was retired. He was looking for another challenge. And they asked Warren to come and build a dairy plant. They said, we'll give you 2 acres of our farm if you'll put a processing plant there. The plant is literally 400 yards from where the cows are milked. Warren had a Navy mentor who said, be very efficient and compact with space. So he can run the entire plant from this console he's standing by. It has all the pressure and temperature switches. He can move the milk from the fresh milk line to the whole milk line to the skim milk line to yogurt or whatever he wants to do. He designed the plant so it actually uses 1/4 of the electricity a normal plant its size would use, and it recycles all the water possible. So by doing the right thing environmentally, Warren was able to create a competitive advantage for his dairy operation, his dairy processing plant. Snowville is ranked as #1 or #2 milk in the country by Milkweed magazine in Madison, Wisconsin. Very high quality product, very good price, very good connection to consumers. This is a business cluster that's formed around Warren Taylor's shop. He buys milk from local farms, he hires local labor. Most of his packaging and equipment comes from far away because there's no producer right there, but the more you can find local sources for that, the more the local multiplier will increase. He's shipping food from Columbus, Ohio, all the way to Washington, D.C., to Whole Foods stores. Kroger features his milk, as well as independent stores across Ohio. But I'd like to focus on the right side of this slide with Jenny's Splendid Ice Creams, which actually is able to make use of another innovation that Warren made. Warren just realized that he could take his skim milk, which some farmers and processors throw away, he could use a nanofiltration process to make that a condensed milk that was a very good base for making ice cream. Jenny's Splendid Ice Cream in Ohio wanted to make Ohio-made ice cream with Ohio farm products. They really needed a base like that to make their business work. When I met Warren, he was serving up pawpaw ice cream at the local pawpaw festival. When I talked to Jenny Britton Bauer at Jenny's Splendid Ice Cream, she said, Warren and I are on the phone constantly, every week, and we are always asking, how do we help each other out? How do we sort of coordinate our businesses? If I want to go into a new town, like she went into Louisville a couple years ago, she said, I won't go there unless Warren's able to handle the milk output to sustain that growth. What I think is the best indicator I know of for good food business networks forming is this kind of comment Jenny Britton Bauer made. Our growth is based on Snowville's growth. We're always in communication with each other. I think if we see that happening, we're going to have some luck in keeping wealth attracted locally and staying there. When I talked to Jenny Britton Bauer, I found out her business cluster that she inspires with her work. She's hiring local people, and the more they buy at local stores, the more the local economic multiplier goes up. She has a windmill on our roof to generate electricity. The more she's creating green energy on her own site, the more the economic multiplier goes up. On the left-hand side, you see all the products that she purchases from Ohio farms. She buys all the strawberries she needs when they're ripe. She hires her staff extra hours on the weekend to wash and pick and clean those and freeze them so that she can have all the strawberries for strawberry ice cream for an entire year, all raised from Ohio farms. My favorite flavor of hers is a blueberry buttermilk sweet corn ice cream that comes out in August, which is really an amazing combination of summery flavors and also sourness. This, again, is I think, a really good description of how the density of relationships in a local area that helps promote local food business clusters. They're not stopping there, though. They decided, Warren came up with an idea. He said, my trucks are bringing milk in from the cities, and the trucks are half empty. I'd like to use that more efficiently. So he talked to some local produce growers and said, how about if I bring your produce from your farm into the city of Columbus on my truck? I can charge you less than it would cost you to ship it yourself. It'll save me, make my operation more efficient, and it also gets the food to Columbus. A food bank in Columbus that has extra warehouse space said, you can store that food in our warehouse until we find a buyer. And luckily, a grocery store about 100 yards from Jenny's Ice Cream said, we'll buy that stuff and feature it on our shelves. So you have 2 private firms and 1 nonprofit coordinating to get fresh food from inner city, from farmers in Southeast Ohio into Columbus. And they definitely see this as a step towards actually making sure that inner city people have access to fresh, high-quality food directly from Southeast Ohio farms. So you have actually a sort of the startings of a new welfare approach, which is really homegrown, self-financed, and also developing a stronger local economy. That's all I'm going to say for today. That's a very quick overview of what I wish I had a lot more time to talk to you about, but thank you for that attention to some depressing numbers and hopefully an inspiring story. And now we'll move on to some real practical examples from around the country.